Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling a mission, really. We're trying to make sense of the massive military escalation in Venezuela. It's something that erupted on January 3rd, 2026, with what the world now knows as Operation Southern Spear. We go through a huge stack of source material history, geopolitics, economic reports, international law, to build a clear picture for you. Our goal is to really trace how this relationship, the U.S. and Venezuela, went from a functional oil partnership to an active military conflict, and why this one crisis has sent shockwaves everywhere.
It's a huge shift. I mean, for years, the hostility was all about sanctions, diplomatic pressure. It was a long, slow fight. But to move to direct military action and to hear this claim about detaining a foreign head of state, it just raises these enormous questions about sovereignty right out of the gate.
Okay, so let's start right there with the shock of January 3rd. What do the immediate reports tell us?
The first reports came in during the early hours. We're talking about significant U.S. military strikes deep inside Venezuela, not just on the border.
So including the capital, Caracas.
Including Caracas, yes. The sources describe multiple explosions, aircraft activity, and widespread power outages. This wasn't a small-scale operation.
It sounds like it was designed for maximum impact.
Oh, absolutely. The goal was clearly rapid destabilization, create paralysis, force the regime to break down fast.
Which brings us to the bomb show claim that came just hours later.
Right. U.S. President Donald Trump announced publicly that President Nicolás Maduro and his wife had been captured.
Captured and flown out of the country.
Flown out of the country. Now, we have to be really clear here. Venezuelan authorities have not confirmed this at all. Maduro's public appearances stopped, but there's no independent confirmation.
But the claim itself is the real move, isn't it?
Exactly. For a government to announce that without UN backing is a massive geopolitical provocation on its own, true or not.
And what was the immediate reaction from inside Venezuela?
Predictable, but also very firm. They declared a national emergency, called it military aggression, an imperialist invasion.
And they called for people to mobilize.
Yes, calls for popular resistance groups to mobilize and resist what they were framing as a foreign occupation. And we have to look at the official U.S. justification for this, Operation Southern Spear.
Right.
The official line was that it targeted criminal networks connected to the Venezuelan state. It leans on these long-running accusations of, drug trafficking, narco-terrorism.
Accusations that Maduro has always denied.
Always.
Okay.
So the U.S. is trying to frame this as a counter-narcotics operation, not an invasion for regime change.
But not everyone's buying that, I take it.
Not at all. Russia immediately called it armed aggression. Most of the initial international reaction was less about who was right and more about the fear of, what kind of precedent does this set?
Okay, so to understand how we even got to this point, we need to go back. Way back.
We do. The relationship really unfolded in 3 acts. Act I, you could call it friends because of oil. From the early 1900s to the 1980s, things were, they were cooperative. The U.S. was the biggest customer, the biggest investor.
Even after Venezuela nationalized its oil in 1976. That usually sours things.
It does, but here it was just pragmatism. The U.S. needed that specific type of heavy crude for its refineries, and both countries were aligned against communism during the Cold War. So, business came first.
Until Hugo Chavez.
That's Act Two, right?
That's Act Two, ideological enemies. Chavez comes to power in 1999, and everything changes. He brings in socialism, this very strong anti-U.S. rhetoric.
And he starts aligning with U.S. rivals.
Exactly. Cuba, Russia, China, Iran. It was a direct ideological challenge. And the real breaking point was that 2002 coup attempt.
Which was very short-lived.
It was. But Chavez was convinced the U.S. was behind it. The U.S. denied it, but the damage was done. Trust just collapsed. That's when it became openly hostile. Which brings us to Act 3 under Maduro, sanctions and confrontation. This starts around 2015. Venezuela's economy is in freefall hyperinflation, shortages, and the U.S. just keeps layering on sanctions, targeting the state oil company PDVSA. This was the maximum pressure campaign, and it included the big diplomatic break in 2019 when the U.S. recognized Juan Guaidó as interim president.
Correct. But even in the middle of all that, there was this strange period from about 2021 to 2024. Our sources call it the mixed signals era.
Because the U.S. actually eased some sanctions.
For a time, yeah. The war in Ukraine created this global energy crunch, and the U.S. needed more oil on the market, so they allowed some limited exports to resume.
So that was, what, a brief truce?
I'd call it tactical engagement over strategic mistrust. The fundamental goals never changed. The U.S. wanted democratic reforms, and when the elections were again seen as unfair, the sanctions snapped right back into place. The talks failed because neither side would give up its main objective.
And that regime survival, despite all that pressure,
Yeah.
it wasn't possible on its own. There's this whole foreign support structure.
Absolutely. This is really a proxy contest. You have three main pillars holding up the Venezuelan government: Russia, China, and Cuba.
And they each play a very different role.
Very different. Let's start with Russia. For them, it's about guns and geopolitics. They supply the weapons, most importantly the S-300 air defense systems, and they have military advisors on the ground.
So their goal is to project power.
It's a direct challenge to the U.S. Monroe Doctrine. For Moscow, having a military foothold in Venezuela is all about leverage against Washington.
Then you have China.
China is the money and oil. They're the strategic economic player. They've loaned over $50 billion, mostly paid back in oil. They build infrastructure, and they keep buying Venezuelan crude, sanctions or not, often through intermediaries.
Their whole model is no ideology, just business.
Right.
Just stability and getting their loans repaid.
Exactly. So a military conflict like this is a huge risk for them. Russia risks military assets, but China risks losing a $50 billion investment if a new government decides not to honor those old debts.
Okay, and the third pillar is Cuba. They seem like a small player to have such a big role.
They are the intelligence and control. You could call them the regime survival architects. Havana provides intelligence officers, security advisors. They're deeply embedded in Venezuela's police and internal security.
And for them, it's existential.
It's totally existential. Venezuela provides Cuba with the subsidized oil that keeps their economy afloat. If Maduro's government falls, it's an economic catastrophe for Havana. So they do whatever it takes to ensure political control stays locked down.
Okay, so with these global powers involved, what about the region itself? Latin America seems completely divided on this.
It's deeply split. You have ideology, history, and just raw economic pressure all pulling in different directions. On one side, you've got the left-leaning governments, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, who are all about non-intervention.
They see this as U.S. interference, plain and simple.
Right. But then on the other side, you have countries like Colombia, Chile, Peru. They're focused on democracy and human rights. And for them, it's also practical.
Because of the migration crisis.
Exactly. They've absorbed over 7 million Venezuelan migrants. That puts an incredible strain on their services, so they're pushing hard for political change in Caracas.
And it seems like the history of U.S. interventions in the region just paralyzes everyone.
It's the biggest hurdle. There's this collective memory that makes a lot of leaders think Maduro is bad, but a U.S. military intervention is worse. They fear the precedent, and it means the regional groups, like the OAS, are just deadlocked.
So if the region can't act, that takes us to international law. How does something like the UN Charter even apply to Operation Southern Spear?
Well, this is where it gets really tricky for the U.S. legally. Under Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, sending your military into another country without their consent or UN approval. That's defined as an illegal invasion.
And critics are already using that language.
They are. They're calling it aggression. Now, illegal intervention is only allowed under really 3 conditions. One is self-defense, which doesn't apply here. 2 is UN Security Council authorization, which Russia would obviously veto.
And 3,
intervention by invitation. And the U.S. could try to argue that since they recognized Guaido as the leader, he invited them in. But since he never actually controlled the country, that's a very, very weak legal claim.
So what about the humanitarian argument? The responsibility to protect, or R2P?
That's the other gray zone. R2P is more of a political norm than a hard law. And using it without a UN Security Council resolution is extremely controversial.
Like in Kosovo or Libya.
Precisely. Critics will argue the U.S. is just using human rights and drug trafficking as a cover for a pre-planned regime change goal, which would make this operation, in their view, an illegal invasion.
Let's shift to the economic fallout, because this is where it hits everyone. Why does a fight in the Caribbean make gas prices go up in, say, Tokyo?
It comes down to oil and shipping. First, Venezuela has the world's largest proven oil reserves. So when conflict breaks out, the fear of supply disruption alone sends global prices soaring. It's called a risk premium.
And it's not just any oil, right?
No, it's a special kind of heavy, sour crude. Only certain advanced refineries can handle it efficiently. The ones on the U.S. Gulf Coast and in China and India.
So if that supply is cut off, it's not easy to replace.
Not at all. Those refineries have to find alternatives, and that drives up the cost of specific fuels like diesel and jet fuel all over the world. It just feeds global inflation.
And then there's the shipping.
Right. The Caribbean is a major crossroads for maritime trade. A conflict immediately turns those shipping lanes into war risk zones.
Which means insurance costs go through the roof.
They can go up 5-10 times overnight. And that cost gets passed all the way down the supply chain, making everything from food to electronics more expensive.
Let's use a specific example. What does all this mean for a major economy that's not directly involved, like India?
India is a perfect case study. They import about 85% of their crude oil. So every $10 jump in the price of a barrel creates huge stress on their economy.
So their main concern is economic, not military.
Completely. And diplomatically, they're on a tightrope. They practice what they call strategic autonomy.
Meaning they don't pick sides.
Right. They need to keep good relations with the U.S., but also with Russia, who sells them discounted oil, and with China, a major trading partner.
So they have to condemn the intervention in principle, but quietly hope for stability.
That's the tightrope. Ultimately, this crisis just reinforces for India and countries like it that they have to diversify their energy sources and build up their reserves because their economic stability is now tied to a conflict thousands of miles away.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. From the shock of the operation, back through decades of broken trust, the drivers are clear, really. It's ideology versus capitalism, a fight for regional power, and it's all leveraged by oil and these powerful geopolitical allies.
And you have these two completely opposing narratives. The U.S. says this is justified, it's about security and fighting narco-terrorism. Venezuela and its allies say it's a neo-imperial invasion that violates their sovereignty, and that U.S. claim, whether it's ever confirmed or not, to have detained a foreign head of state without any UN mandate. I mean, that just fundamentally challenges the whole idea of diplomatic immunity.
So the real conflict here isn't just about who's in charge in Caracas. It's about whether the whole international system, the one designed to prevent these kinds of invasions, can actually survive when global energy security and rival superpowers collide like this. And the question I think that leaves for you is this. In a world that's trying to transition away from fossil fuels, does the strategic value of oil reserves still justify this level of geopolitical risk? Or are we watching the last violent gasp of an old, energy-fueled empire?